It was originally called Naval Hospital, Washington City. Sailors and Marines were treated here from 1866 to early in the 20th century. Then, this building took on new roles: a school for Navy hospital corpsmen, a home for war veterans, a place for social services run by the District of Columbia. But this venerable building was never well maintained, and as the years went by, it fell into disrepair. By the 1990s, it was nearly abandoned. New life to the old Naval Hospital would come with the arrival of a new century and a community with their eyes on a building which had turned to seed but stood its ground.
Well, the background of the Naval Hospital is really pretty amazing because it goes all the way back to George Washington. Rather astounding to realize that George Washington himself, one of his last messages to the commissioners of the federal city was to build a naval hospital.
Initially, various temporary facilities were set up near the Navy Yard and Marine Barracks. There was a plan by Benjamin Henry Latrobe, the first trained architect in America. He would erect an elaborate hospital of neoclassical design, but those plans came to an end during the War of 1812 when the British marched through Washington and burned the capital. The building of a permanent naval hospital would come during the Civil War. Violent battles raged all around Washington. The capital, with a population of 75,000, swelled when as many as 50,000 soldiers arrived, wounded, sick, needing care. When the hospitals filled, patients were treated wherever space was to be found: homes, churches, even the Patent Office building and the U.S. Capitol. Soon, tent hospitals sprang up around the city.
Well, this was a tent city. There were tents at Lincoln Park, down on the mall, the Station Armory Hospital where Walt Whitman had been a nurse. We know about that, and there's a room named in his honor here at the Naval Hospital. So there was a strong need to have a permanent facility as a place to heal these wounded warriors.
Support grew for the idea of a permanent naval hospital located near the Navy Yard and Marine Barracks. President Abraham Lincoln visited there often with his friend John Dahlgren, who had been Navy Yard commandant early in the war. Lincoln was aware of the new developments with the Navy and Marine Corps and their contribution to the war effort. Also supporting the idea of a permanent naval hospital was Navy Secretary Gideon Welles.
And it was realizing that, I think, that by the middle of the Civil War, finally, Gideon Welles, the Secretary of the Navy, who was a very strong leader and a strong advocate for the Navy, was able to persuade Congress that there should be a permanent naval hospital. And of course, President Lincoln, who himself was a strong supporter of the Navy, agreed and signed that appropriation.
Congress authorized $25,000 for the construction of Naval Hospital, Washington City. This would be the only naval hospital built during the Civil War.
I think we also have to remember that at this point in the war, although the tide of battle had turned, at the same time, the war was far from over. So the fact that a permanent hospital was approved at this point suggests President Lincoln's confidence that in fact the Union would survive.
You know, we don't know the name of the original architect, but we do credit the final design to Ammi Burnham Young from New England. He brought a sense of grandeur and permanence to the buildings he designed in our communities and our institutions. He designed the Vermont State House and some of the buildings at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And that's how he gained fame, and he came to Washington as the first supervising architect of the U.S. Treasury. He's known for his symmetrical designs. We know this building, for example, has a symmetry. It has the Second Empire mansard roof. He brought all of these various elements into the design of this building which was constructed between 1864 and 1866.
As the hospital's architect, Young was asked to design a structure that would promote a healthy, healing environment. He did this by drawing from the day's most effective elements of hospital design.
He wanted to create a healthy, healing environment. And you look around this building, you'll see the 14-foot tall ceilings in the rooms. You'll see the large windows. And he designed an innovative air circulatory system with the cutting-edge flues that would circulate the air up to the upper levels, which would give the patients a better healing environment.
Naval Hospital, Washington City opened its doors on October 1st, 1866, and received its first patient, Benjamin Drummond.
Benjamin Drummond was a very interesting character. He was an African-American sailor. He enlisted. He did excellent service. He was wounded. He returned to service after his wounds. He was captured by the Confederates. He escaped. It was a dramatic story. He then returned to service and actually served on a Monitor, one of the ironclad vessels in Charleston Harbor. When his wounds reopened, he returned to the hospital, and just happened that on October 1st, 1866, he was the first patient that was enrolled at this hospital.
The hospital received sailors and Marines as patients for another 40 years, but the Navy spent a minimal amount of money on its upkeep. In 1893, the hospital was reported to have received an entire renovation, though that amounted to a coat of paint on the walls and a new floor in the basement. In 1902, Secretary of the Navy William H. Moody stated that the medical facility, after 36 years of service with no major alterations, had become antiquated and insufficient and conformed in no respect to the conditions of modern hospital requirements.
Well, you know, this building did flourish as a naval hospital for 40 years. But in the latter years, you're right, they didn't devote as much funding perhaps as they should have for its maintenance and upkeep. In the early 20th century, when it was no longer a hospital, it did serve as a Navy hospital training center for several years, and there were some hospital corpsmen who graduated and went on to probably serve on some ships in the Navy.
During World War I, new recruits had their physical examinations at what was now called the Old Naval Hospital. After the war, large numbers of veterans converged upon Washington to apply for benefits such as military pensions and disability care. The men needed a place to stay, and the Old Naval Hospital provided it. By the 1960s, the Old Naval Hospital was turned over to the District of Columbia, which used it for a variety of social services. But by then, the building had deteriorated. It had turned to seed, but stood its ground, in the words of Capitol Hill historian Mary Z. Gray. By the 1990s, the building was nearly abandoned.
You know, this had been on the most endangered landmarks list for Washington, D.C. What were we going to do with this building? There were a lot of proposals. Somebody wanted to make it a Navy Hospital Museum. But we wanted the building, I mean the residents of Capitol Hill, who came together, thanks to Nikki and Steve Simrot, who spearheaded this drive. They helped form the Old Naval Hospital Foundation to get the ball rolling, to bring new life to this building, which had so much potential. They were able to hire a great rehabilitation architect, David Bell, well known for his work in historic preservation. And he wanted to bring this landmark back to its original grandeur, the way Ami B. Young had designed it. The Friends of the Old Naval Hospital saw the need to bring new life to this building, to save it. And the Old Naval Hospital Foundation carried the ball to make that dream become a reality. And voila, look what we have here.
The Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital opened November 2011. The staff at the Hill Center say they want residents of Washington, D.C. to see more than a restored historic landmark, but to see a vibrant home for culture, education, and city life that really has something to offer all ages, all backgrounds, all interests. Frank Robinson works at the Hill Center now and was on the building's restoration team.
Have you ever been part of something bigger than you? This is what the Hill Center is giving me. It's bigger than I could have ever imagined, that this place was actually helping people in the 1800s physically for healing, and now it's doing the same thing again in the 21st century, along with helping with the mind and the body. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible.
We are experimenting with every different kind of cultural arts, humanities program, but also want to be a real crossroads for the community here in Capitol Hill, where folks who might not normally come together do. And they come through Hill Center, whether it's for a class, a program, a community event, whether it's to visit one of the nonprofit offices that are on our 3rd floor. In the future, I think we're looking towards our sesquicentennial in 2016. We will be in the building for 5 years, and I hope to be standing there looking back at a center that has really made a mark not only here in the immediate Capitol Hill community, but regionally and across the city. That when folks hear about a book signing or an author lecture or a class or a yoga course, that they think of Hill Center as a center for excellence and city life.